it's funny. It's long overdue because you're one of those people that it's like, oh, we can always have Matt
Yeah,
on because
like,
he's my friend and editor, and then it ends up never
and
happening.
he's got nothing going on, so
Nothing. Yeah. I don't know how you do it actually. How do you do it? Matt, for those of you who don't know, Matt McDonald is what are you? What is your exact title?
I'm the managing editor of
Managing editor.
yeah
You
of
should
the
be
spec.
the editor in chief.
It's very
It
generous and kind of you to say,
it
but
feels more like that's where you should be. Uh,
I'm not doing medieval court things, so no.
um, Matt has been editing me for, I guess we just celebrated 5 years recently. Was that it?
Yeah, I think so. That would make
I think
sense.
maybe.
I'm trying to think. Didn't you wrote your first piece for us was your Thanksgiving one, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like that would either have been the Thanksgiving of 2018 or 19. I think it was 18,
Oh, might have been
right?
18.
So therefore 6 years.
6 years. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. How did you get into this weird, wacky world? Because currently you have been caught in the crosshairs of our global leader, Elon Musk. Well, you are the spectator in particular.
Sure.
And now that piece is unbanned, is the journalist who wrote it still? So for people who don't know, explain what happened for people who don't know. Because I think this is
Okay.
actually really topical and interesting, and then we'll get into how you
Sure.
became a
Okay.
journalist.
Well, from the top, over the holidays, there was kind of the resurfacing of this theory that Elon Musk was maintaining an alt account on X, his website, right? An alt account being, a burner or like a pseudonymous account, which he's, either using for the purpose of trolling or being able to post as, not Elon Musk, right? And
Or
there,
complimenting his parenting skills.
right, exactly. So, I mean, I think there's been a fairly long-standing theory that potentially this account at Adrian Dittman was Elon's alt, which resurfaced over the holidays. I think one of the reasons it resurfaced was in the light of Elon's kind of blow up over the H-1B visas, where he managed to sort of fall afoul of Steve Bannon and kind of your more old school MAGA types about, high skill visas and who should be allowed into America to work versus whether you should be training Americans to do those jobs. So it's kind of in the context of that this uh, Dittman theory kind of reemerged, and Jacqueline Sweet, who is a contributor to our website, basically had been kind of pursuing a tip or like her kind of inclination that while people were positing, oh, Dittman is Musk, she was fairly sure that it wasn't him, and that a lot of the, so-called evidence pointing to them being one and the same person was a bit specious and easy to knock down. And so the tail end of last year, she started investigating and looking into, whether there was in fact a real person called Adrian Dittman, who could be the real owner of this account. And so that's ultimately what she discovered. There's a guy called Adrian Dittman who lives in Fiji. He's German, which I think is one of the reasons that people thought he was potentially Elon Musk, is that he he's speaking English in a German accent, which to the untrained ear might sound quite similar to, a slightly Americanized South African accent with which Musk speaks, right? But basically what she's doing in the process of pursuing the story is finding a fairly significant amount of public information about this guy Dittman. So, he works in Fiji and has various businesses there. One of his businesses, was being kind of like honored and shouted out by the Fijian government this year, which is in a YouTube video for the government of Fiji. So that's, on YouTube, publicly available. There's also various kind of social media profiles of his that he has, which, anyone can see and access. And so what Jacqueline did in her story was basically pull all this together and say, there's this widespread theory that Musk is Dittman. These high profile outlets are covering the theory, but not really digging into it. Like the Daily Mail and the New Republic and Newsweek all had done stories about the theory without investigating, or doing any kind of investigative work into finding out whether or not it was true. And so what Jacqueline did, therefore, was, research it and present the evidence to the contrary. So the purpose of the story that Jackie did was gather all this public information, which challenges this theory, which obviously is worthwhile doing because news outlets like the New Republic and Newsweek and the Daily Mail had started to write about the theory in question. And they were doing so without actually bothering to investigate. So
Mm.
Jackie bothered to investigate. We ran her story, basically set up the story to edit over Thursday and Friday, decided to publish it on Saturday afternoon. Well, for me, Saturday afternoon, UK time. And then, yeah, everything was kind of fine. A lot of people were reading the story at first. And then Musk himself, responds to it by saying, effectively joking, being like, oh no, I'm real. I am Adrian Dittman. Like, it's time that the truth came out, right? Having obviously previously denied it. I think Dittman himself then posted basically the clip from the end of the first Iron Man film where Tony Stark's in the press conference and then says, "I am Iron Man," right? So
Uh-huh.
they're leaning into it and kind of joking around it. But then what happens is the story itself is kind of restricted on X. So if you had tweeted it, for example, I'd retweeted Jackie's tweet of this story. Her tweet is gone, and any links to the article on X are also gone. And then Jackie finds that basically her account has been restricted for, at that time, 30 days for a violation of the X rules. And so you've got this screenshot now, which was initially Jackie tweeting her story and then Musk responding and saying, "I'm Dittman." And now what you've got is Musk responding saying that to this post violates the X rules, right?
Right.
And I mean, I think basically what the allegation was, and to me, it's still not clear, what exactly happened or who exactly made the decision, other than, potentially maybe someone reported it as a violation of the X rules, or maybe someone at X, not saying that it's Elon Musk, but it could be. Her account and her profile, you can see it, but what the initial ruling was, you violate these 3 posts that you've made have violated the X rules or the X terms of service, right? And I think basically the 3 posts which it was saying was, her initial tweet about what the story was, the follow-up tweet, and then the third tweet was the link to the story. And so Musk had responded to that third tweet. Like I said, X is a big organization, not as big as it once was when it was Twitter, but it's still a big organization where lots of people work and they have
It's
a
5
large.
Indians. Just kidding.
I'm not in
It's
a position to
Musk and
comment.
6 Indians.
But I mean, obviously, so one of the feats of Elon's stewardship of this app is that he kind of uses it as regularly as Trump did, right? When Trump was on it the first time round and when he was president, and he seems to be kind of perpetually online and is always kind of responding to stuff. So the idea that it was him who made the decision is not entirely beyond the realms of the possibility, but then ultimately you kind of would expect that decision to be made lower down the tree potentially. But so what happens is, as a result of those 3 posts, they're reported as a violation of the terms of service. The link is gone, and if you attempt to either tweet the link or DM it to someone on X, you're basically get served a message saying that you're not able to do it, right? And basically because I think the content had been flagged as potentially harmful, right? And so in terms of why that would be, ironically, I think is fairly similar to what the initial argument was regarding restricting the New York Post's Hunter Biden scoops in October 2020, back when X was Twitter and under its previous ownership, right? And it's the potential of, is there material in here which shouldn't be published because it's private, right? And
Mhm.
obviously there was the suspicion that, well, I think for, obviously for Hunter Biden's laptop, compounded in that was these allegations that, it could potentially contain Russian misinformation and hadn't been vetted properly, right? Which it turns out were obviously put out about there through the help of the Biden campaign. The Biden campaign's Antony Blinken, now Secretary of State Antony Blinken, basically encouraging all of these former intelligence officials to do a story with Natasha Bertrand, who I think at the time was at Politico, basically saying this bears the hallmarks, right, of Russian misinformation. And so
Right.
that helped lend credence to the idea that the Post story should have been censored and prevented from circulation on Twitter, when ultimately it shouldn't. None of those people had any proof that Russian mis or disinformation was involved. Obviously, other more mainstream outlets, such as the New York Times, do an investigation two or so years later, which reveals that yes, actually, the laptop was genuine and credible, and there was no reason at all to restrict that story. So the restriction of a link on X, basically, what my point is, that there's precedent for that, and that was what the the X, whoever's making these decisions at X, has decided that that's the correct response for this story. But as I've just kind of relayed to you, the story basically, one, it pulls together information that's already public, so there's no private information in our version of the story. And what's more, it's the purpose of the story isn't to unmask a pseudonym, because Adrian Dittman isn't a pseudonym. The guy who has the account, Adrian Dittman, is called Adrian Dittman, and that's basically what
Right.
the beef proves. So definitionally, it can't be doxing. It's impossible that it
Right.
is, and that's a kind of a ludicrous misinterpretation, I think, of your own, both of the dictionary in terms of what is in there when it says doxing, but also of even X's like potentially fairly broad definition of that term. And so as a result, like in the days since, a number of people have kicked off about the potential the censorship of this story, and about Jackie having her account restricted. And then at the time we speak, the story has now been, you're now able to share the story again. So that's the one, it's the one Spectator article that you couldn't share over the last weekend, and you, as of earlier this morning UK time, you can again. But Jacqueline, I think, appealed, and her account is still restricted. I believe that the naughty step period has been reduced from 30 days to 7, but it's still saying you need to delete these 3 posts to have your account reinstated in 7 days time, which ultimately is still kind of ridiculous, and she should not have to do, because the accusation of doxing against her and against this story and against her reporting is completely invalid.
Yeah. That's crazy, actually, that they're still restricting her for 7 days and trying to make her delete those original posts when he responded to them. I don't understand.
Yeah,
The madness of these platforms is that there's no transparency, and you don't understand why these decisions are being made at all, ever.
yeah. Well, so
And go on.
I mean, ultimately, the old adage goes, and this was commonly repeated at conservatives back when Mark Zuckerberg was less centrist than he was, and back when Twitter was under its previous ownership. These are privately owned websites, right? You don't actually have an enshrined First Amendment right as an American to do and say and post what you want. The owners of the website ultimately have the right to delete what they want whenever they want, and circulate or restrict or boost or shadow ban anything they want whenever they want. They can do that, but they can't do that and then claim that we are being consistent with First Amendment values and with the Western idea of freedom of speech, because that's not that behavior and restricting on that matter, unless obviously the exceptions being fire in a movie theater, incitement, stuff like that. Although ultimately those caveats are abused often, but you can't claim to be defending that as a value, or even purchase the website and say that you've done that. You've done so to enshrine that value, and then behave exactly as the previous owners who you were so critical of did. So
Yeah, it's also weird because coming into this, and this is a lot of inside baseball for people who aren't on Twitter or X, although now it's kind of outside baseball because you can't escape Elon wherever you go. But coming into this, there were a lot of conservatives who were on the Steve Bannon MAGA side of the H-1B visa debate with
mm,
Elon, who were losing their blue checks and getting demonetized and having their subscribers canceled, and basically similar stuff that used to happen to conservatives,
yeah,
actually.
to exactly the same people.
To the exact same people, because I think sometimes I think Laura Loomer made a big stink, and then it ended up being that she actually was doxing somebody because she posted someone's address
Right.
inadvertently, and
Yeah.
so she but I don't know. There was a lot of other people who it wasn't exactly clear why they had been demonetized or why, and then some were just, you know, it's tough on it is tough when it's the same people that, end up on Rumble or wherever.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, we got 2 strikes on YouTube, and
good, good.
they were ridiculous, but they were it's fine. They were ridiculous. I wish they weren't so ridiculous, but one of them was for an ad read we did for Jordan Harbinger's his podcast. This is an old
Hmm.
podcast that exists up there, and in the ad read, we basically read verbatim what he wrote, and it was like, "Come to your own conclusions, use your brain for critical thinking," like, his whole podcast is, "Don't let the people tell you what to think, you come up with your own conclusions yourself," and that was
Hmm.
literally the sentence that they said we got a strike for. I'm like, "Well, this is terrifying." I think it's
But is there anything on his podcast which would regularly
no.
fall afoul or be like he's just like a motivational self help guy, like or
Yeah.
fun? Great.
No, but it wasn't even like, they'll tell you exactly at least YouTube is a little bit more transparent now. They'll tell you exactly the sentence that gets you flagged, and even after that sentence, there was other stuff uh, that we would think would be more flag worthy, but it was this one sentence of, like, "Think for yourself." I'm like,
Mhm.
"This is not great." And then another one was just because I have a speech impediment, and I think it was they
Kept saying the M word. Or
yeah. I said I can't even remember now because my brain is just empty. They kept s I said something and they thought it was like got shot or shot at or something like that, and we
Mhm.
appealed it. I was like, "This is
Or did you say
clearly
like
AI."
gotcha?
I forget exactly what it was. I'm just like, I don't keep anything in the past in my brain. It's always just
Mhm.
moving forward. Um, it was really, and it was so stupid and so dumb, and we appealed it because we were like, "Clearly this is AI just not understanding what I was saying," and I was repeating a headline, and they still rejected it. And then you have to do 30 days of, like, some kind of I think I forget what our punishment was, but you also have to go
Community
to, like,
service.
you have to do, like, rehabilitate
You gotta litter pick in Thousand Oaks.
no, we have to do a class. You have to do like, rehab class. You've gotta
Great.
spend some kind of hour or so, like, learning about
Like like when you speak for speeding.
something weird. All these
That's
platforms are yeah, I don't know. I feel like it doesn't I think one of the hardest things about being a content creator or even someone in your position who's constantly feeding the
al
algorithm,
also a content creator, yeah.
also a content creator. Yeah, but I feel see you as more like a high level. You actually have an organization that you're putting content. I don't know. The Spectator exists whether or not you guys are on YouTube. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yes.
You actually have a print magazine too. So you are also analog. You're not just in the digital world. So yes, you're
Yeah.
making content, but
Yeah.
you
But
actually
the arguments and conversations that The Spectator has been having with its audience about freedom of speech go back 197 years, I think now. So,
wow, that's crazy. Wild. Yeah, so
yeah.
how did you get into so where did you go to college? Not that that
Uh,
matters, but I'm
am I
curious.
I'm being credential checked? I went to the University of Exeter. I went to the University of Exeter, which is in the southwest of England. Um, I used to tell when I first came to the US in like to work in 2015 on a visa legally. I'm keen to stipulate. um, I used to like the reaction I get now to telling people who the most famous people who went to my college are is very different now to it was in 2015. Because in 2015 you'd be like, oh yeah, so I went to Exeter. The two most famous people who went there would be Tom York from Radiohead and J.K. Rowling. And in 2015, people were like, "Oh, Radiohead is awesome," And J.K. Rowling, I'm obsessed with Harry Potter. It's one of the only things I know about British people and the only thing that I talk about. Whereas now you're like, Tom York won't play in Israel. Like still plays in Israel, and then J.K. Rowling's obviously a transphobe with black mold on her walls, and therefore persona
Oh.
non grata among that same generation of people who would have been impressed by those things is now it's now a 50-50 call on what the reaction's like.
I didn't know Tom York still plays in Israel.
Yeah, I think it's a banned decision, but they got criticized and heckled for it, and I think he was just
Oh,
told them. I
interesting.
think he either walked stage or kind of like taught them down for it. So because they did like a
Mm,
stadium, they've done like a stadium show in Tel Aviv or something.
mhm. How dare they?
Yeah.
Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It's such a pain in the butt. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my doctor, then get a referral from her, and wait weeks more for an appointment with the specialist I needed to see just to get some lab work. Quest simplifies this process. I can purchase my own lab tests online and test for a multitude of health issues I might be concerned about, then take those results to my doctor better armed with the information I need. At questhealth.com, you can get hundreds of tests across several different categories, from allergies to heart health, hormones, sexual health, women's health tests for egg quantity, perimenopause, menopause, men's health tests for testosterone, prostate, and so much more. These are lab quality tests, the same ones you'd be given at your doctor's office, so prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code WALK-INS to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code WALK-INS for 25% off. So did you always want to be a journalist? Were you like a little kid who was very nosy and took notes? I was just
Um.
imagining little Matt like taking a
No,
notepad and
I
spying on adults.
I don't think so. My earliest foray into journalism, I think, technically would have been in America. I came and I worked on a summer camp in Connecticut when I was 18. Before I went to university, I was their first ever camp photographer, which now in the digital age, like, is more forward thinking. But then ultimately, your job among your counselors who you're working with is like, oh, so you take pictures of kids, and you're like, yeah, but like professionally, like, that's my job. Right? So but as part of that, the camp director wanted me to set up a camp newspaper which the kids wrote, and so technically I think my first editorial project that I worked on was this Gibney Gazette, like an 8-page newsletter that I kind of read and edited and then put together in like
Oh,
2010.
cute.
Yeah. And then um, I got involved with a student news site called The Tab, which started at Cambridge University in 2009, and then was kind of in the process of starting to expand to other places back when I was in second year of university. And I guess, when they launched, it was the Tab with kind of a play on Cantab, which is someone who goes to Cambridge, but then also kind of like they were a bit like tabloidy and kind of had like a kind of British red top style, which I think they swiftly ultimately kind of deviated from eventually as the brand kind of grew. But the kind of ethos of the site was that it wasn't like an official university newspaper. It um, wasn't written for academics at the university, wasn't really written for alumni. It was kind of written for students currently there about the student experience, and therefore ultimately kind of had more of a local journalism feel. Like most of
Mm,
the tab sites tried not to do national stuff because ultimately you'll get better as a student writing about things that and being able to like conduct interviews and do things like that with people you can get access to. That's probably much more useful and valuable than you doing a review of like the latest Marvel film that's come out, for example.
right.
And so I worked for that as a student. I say worked, unpaid. All the students were unpaid. I think ultimately, but then it was one of those things where it was a casual thing that you could do and put in your resume, or if you invested a lot of time in it, then it could lead to a job in the media. It could lead to you having a strong enough application to go and do a master's in journalism in London. Or like there was one year where I think the Telegraph's grad scheme takes 4 people and 3 of them were like tab editors. And like there's a big presence now of you know former student journalists who did the same fairly dissident website that I did as a student, who are now kind of big reporters in Westminster.
Mm.
which is quite cool to see. One of them works at the Spectator, actually. Actually, no, I think two of them work at the Spectator technically, that
Oh,
aren't
wow.
me in London. Um, so yeah, I worked for them when I graduated in their London office, kind of helped them expand across the UK and across the country, and then they, being a media startup in 2015, raised venture capital money to develop a tech side and expand to the US. So that's what kind of first took me to America. And then being a media tech startup in around the 2015, they ran out of money because they couldn't work out how to monetize. So, but I mean, it was a good experience. I would say on the whole, and we worked with various different student journalists, different campuses in the ultimately the UK, US, briefly Ireland and Canada as well, technically. And then from that, after they kind of ceased operations in the US, I kind of pivoted that into freelancing for the Spectator a little bit, who had just started in America at that time. And then I think I technically became their first US hire,
Oh,
um,
okay.
which was the summer of 2018. And then
Wow.
so I've been in the US with the Spectator since then.
Wow. What a ride. You have so much insight into the kind of it's 2025,
It
obviously.
is. It is. Project
And
2025 is upon us.
we're here. What's your general feeling and prediction about the kind of state of media and journalism and in this kind of I don't know, whatever they're calling it, the realignment politically, but also just what you're seeing with all the subscriber sites, new sites like Glenn Greenwald and Barry and yeah, what's your general what's your general feeling about things?
I think it's
Spectator,
I think it's
magazines. I've seen
yeah.
3 magazines launch in the
Yeah.
past.
I think the magazines launching now may be under the same ethos that we launched our US product, which is basically thinking a lot of magazines, obviously, and print products over the last 20 years or so have lost money because their budgets were, so high, and obviously the cost of production and printing costs ultimately became not worth it. And also, doing journalism is expensive. And I say that, producing content and blogging and writing opinions and columns is cheap, but then actually spending resources on investigations, interviews, your legal bill, uh, the money to get you in trouble, right? That's what kind of costs money. But then for print publications launching now, I mean, I think one of the reasons that we did it was almost as a sort of novelty, but then also a sense that I don't think we were that convinced that that many people would pay for a purely online product. And that is, I think, a
Mm,
change over the last 5 years, is that there's been more of a willingness to pay for, a premium Substack, or to pay for a digital only subscription to a website. Like obviously, I think the New York Times did insane numbers throughout the Trump administration, and a lot of those subscriptions are digital only. Um,
right.
but I think, but yeah, so I think for us, with producing a print product, it was the fact that like we want to physically sell something, and then also kind of invest the time and effort into making the magazine look good, so that when you feel it in your hands, it feels different and better to all of these other publications which you've watched potentially dwindle in the US over the last few decades. I'm
Okay.
trying to think what else do you say the state of media as we go into 2025.
Like,
Uh,
just
it's a
yeah,
worthy
just how
it's a worthy investment, right? I think it's worth spending money on, whether you are a multimillionaire or billionaire owner or investor or kind of benevolent donor. Um, Looking to invest in reporting is one of the biggest things that you can put money into, that is
mhm,
that is genuinely philanthropic and a societal good. But then equally, it's also good as a consumer and as someone who cares about the truth and finding things out, and discerning what's fake news and what isn't. I think that one of the ways that you rectify that is by putting your wallet where your mouth is, right, and paying as a subscriber for quality reporting. That's obviously on a both. I'm talking mostly national, but like local news in the UK and US has been decimated. Because it's homogenized so much over the last 2 decades, with conglomerates buying up local papers and then basically turning the local news sites into just like a churning content factory, where they're cross-posting TV listings and writing about Manchester United Football Club, for example. Whereas ultimately that means that you're seeing less local reporting, in the United Kingdom and the United States, and that's a consequence of the kind of media ownership model that ultimately I don't think has really worked for them, because you don't keep those readers if you stop satisfying their need for local news. So
Right. Yeah, it's the, like, destruction of local news has been so bad for everything. But again, it is like they're doing real journalism.
yeah, a lot of
And
them.
I don't yeah. Yeah, I don't know, it's weird, like, I know Playboy, where I came from, they're launching, like, a new one time a year magazine they're trying to come back, and then
Mhm.
The Blaze it started one and offering it as kind of an extra for a premium subscription for the
Yeah,
online. So this is something else I'm seeing for print, and then, yeah, it's been it's been weird to be kind of at the forefront of a lot of the new media, that still keeps it's still kind of this wave that keeps rolling, like the new Rumble, the new Patreon, all of these things. I've jumped from platform to platform, and I know a lot of people have subscriber fatigue. I can see that always at the beginning of every year now, which is really funny. It's like the same way that people are like, "We're going on a diet." People will be like, I'm, you know, getting control of my budget and canceling all these subscriptions, and it's
mhm.
always like at the beginning of the year. I don't know if you see that too, but it's just the like, I'm gonna get my life together. Um,
I think
that, that
this month we're actually doing okay. So
that's good.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know, I just don't know how it's just I hear a lot of, like, is it sustainable? And now it feels so fractured, and I don't know, it's very I don't and, like, now we are all the media, Matt, didn't you know?
I
Everybody's the media.
I think Elon Musk has posted that 3 times this morning since, while this whole thing's been going on. Obviously, the wider context of this story is that he spent a lot of this weekend kind of trying to displace both the leaders of the Labour Party and Reform in the UK, and suggesting that the King dissolve Parliament over the grooming gangs scandal, which obviously has been fairly well reported here over the last decade, but he's discovered for the first time. So that's an interesting context into which to be like a very minor storyline in what's going on in his life. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I'm not sure
I
about X as a tool for journalism in terms of. I think that the community notes as an innovation is potentially a good rectifier for putting more, giving more power to users over, the media and over reporters. That like if you do get something which is that like wildly wrong, then ultimately you have potentially a small mod ready to mobilize and correct that, which is a good thing. Or like for me, the community notes I tend to see most often, I don't know if you get this, it just says, "This is a secret ad for stake gambling," and it's basically have you seen
Yeah,
that? And
I
like
love that
pointing
you
that,
can community note ads. It's
yeah,
so great.
and you're just like, yeah, they're taking advantage of people who are addicted to gambling, which I agree. People should call that out. That's a bad thing. Um,
Yeah. I see a lot too. I mean, I think community notes is great, but then sometimes it's weird how when it's yeah, I guess it's like, well, yeah, it's very strange. I saw Elon and that Malaysian kid, Ian
Ian
Miles
Miles Cheong,
Chong,
yeah,
they were kind of going back and forth, and Ian, who's just, perpetually dick riding Elon into the sunset, into places that make me uncomfortable to watch publicly. He was saying like, "Oh, terms of service, this is what you get." And Elon was saying, "Yeah, this you can't," because they were quote tweeting Stephen Miller,
right.
not the immigration Stephen Miller, but
Stephen
our
L. Miller, yeah,
contributor,
yes,
uh saying that he had been, because he had been kind of posting about this, how ridiculous this was and
yes.
absurd, and then he was, responding to this, but I'm like, Okay, you don't know what doxing is then, smartest man in the world or whatever, and
Yeah,
also the piece is liberated, so why wouldn't she be?"
r- right. Completely true. I also think that in the tweet you're referencing, Elon Musk referred to quote so-called journalist, which is interesting because obviously Ian Miles Chong is a quote so-called journalist. Ultimately, he's previously written for the Rebel and Heat Street and other publications on the right in North America, while in Malaysia. But then also another fairly famous British so-called journalist, Tommy Robinson, who many people in Britain and certainly the British media would argue is not a journalist. Elon has spent the weekend tweeting that he should be freed from jail, which he's in for, I think, contempt of court and effectively starting an argument with a 15-year-old Syrian child.
Okay.
I mean, I mean, it's a fairly perplexing. It's a fairly perplexing. The thing is that, yeah, I think community notes in general could be a good thing, but the question is also, I was reading a story today about Wikipedia editing and the fact that if you're
Yeah.
an editor for Wikipedia, like obviously, I believe there's a fairly wide scale information war going on, where like you can competitively edit the same Wikipedia article to basically include or cite or change certain things. And it's basically if you have enough clout within, I think it's effectively like Reddit, right? If you've got enough moderator points, then your edit will maybe seen as more. But then my understanding is that there's a lot of articles about Israel Palestine at the moment, which are kind of going back and forth. Um, and therefore, like, if your objective is, I just need to find, I just want to go on the internet and look at a screen and find out what's true. Um, our tech systems, be they, your user sourced, online encyclopedia, or be they social media, a social media app like X, which ostensibly wants to be the everything app. You need to be able to, you as the service provider need to be, make your delivery system one that gives people the best answers fast, or at least if there's no agreed conclusion, prevents both sides and lets them make up their own mind. As that your podcast that you were born for advertising said so well.
Yeah, it's I wonder what's gonna happen with all of this with Elon and, um we were joking about this on Dumpster Fire this week, just how I'm like, Elon's about to learn that America loves to build people up so that they can tear them down.
Mm.
And especially when they're overexposed,
But
he just
briefly tell me, when you refer to Elon as your nemesis, can you quickly characterize that, where you've been saying that and in what context?
I've been saying that for years on Dumpster Fire. It started as a joke because my husband and I went to South Africa it completely started as a joke.
The
We went to South Africa.
COVID honeymoon, right? Wasn't that?
Yeah, our
Or
COVID honeymoon, which I
yeah.
wrote about. We went there and Jaron was like, "Wouldn't it be funny if we landed?" And I was like, "Well, we finally got here to the homeland of my hero." And just like I had to find out on our honeymoon that he was like some obsessive Elon fan. So it just became this like inside joke. And I was like, I'll get you, Elon, for ruining my honeymoon. And he's like, where's the cutout of Elon when we arrived in South Africa? So it just became a joke between the two of us. And then I was like, he's my nemesis now, which also became a joke because who would think that this most powerful human being in the world would even ever know who I am or watch any of my stuff. And then we just started covering some of his kind of ridiculous stuff and somewhat authoritarian stuff and just things that he would pull, like naming his kid weird names. We just like covered it on Dumpster Fire kind of
Mm.
playfully and whatever, as my nemesis is at it again. So we had a whole category
Mhm.
jokingly called my nemesis is at it again. But then he bought Twitter, which is
Yeah.
my
The
platform
ultimate.
that I
Yeah.
the ultimate, and I was like, "Oh shit." And I think he has seen some of my stuff because even people who know him pretty well or are friends with him now, because now I'm 1 degree away from him at all times in my life, are like, "I think it is personal." Like, I think that it's not just delusional for me to think that he's just
Mm.
not, because I made fun of, like, he
Well,
and Grimes.
you live in the same state, right? If not
Yeah,
city.
we live in the same city.
Mhm.
I mean, ish, like, we live in the burbs of, but yeah, so it became, I mean, I've talked about this even on Rogan about how this joke kind of took on a life of its own, and then he, like, bought my favorite platform, and I was like, "Oh, shit. I hope he didn't see any of those jokes I made," and perhaps he did because I think they're quite thin-skinned, these billionaires, but yeah, uh so that's how he became my nemesis, and then it just became this joke because it's like a ridiculous thing that this person who's the richest man in the world would even like, the idea of a nemesis is that you know of each other and it's like a mutual thing.
Yeah.
It's not like a one-sided thing.
Sherlock and Moriarty, right?
It
Like,
just became a joke. It just became this joke, and then it, like, took on this life again of its own, and now the, like, diehard dumpster fire fans who've been watching this evolve over the years are like, that's why they'll refer to him as my nemesis. So that's kind of the long and short of how this, thing began, but some of it was born out of just me observing the kind of rich guy that Elon is.
mm,
He's like, and I joke about this too with people like, a lot of you haven't dated a mercurial billionaire and it shows. I think any woman who's dated a very wealthy man, and I don't mean like a rich guy, a typical rich guy, I mean like in the 0.001% knows exactly what kind of life they live. And it's like a different I called it the zoo of the 0.01% when I experienced it. You are living in a parallel world. They do not like, that's what's so crazy to me. They cosplay as kind of men of the like, "You're the media now, plebs," and,
mm,
like, if you fly private, you have no idea what it's like to be a normal person. You just don't. You're in a
yeah.
different world. You
I've
are
never
living in
flown.
a different
I've
world.
I've never flown business class. I genuinely, and I like the idea that we, the media, are the elites. Like, okay. Like the
Yeah.
person who wrote that story is a single mom in Long Island, and you're like, yeah, the media teaming up again. I'm the world's richest man. Like,
Yeah, exactly, exactly, and that is what something like that where people are like, "Oh, I don't see what the big deal is." It's like, well, if you're doing something like this for a story this stupid, and it's not actually definitionally doxing, why can't you see how this would be concerning for somebody who has his finger on a platform like this and
yeah,
is somebody who should be, he does not respond. I see what he does. I see it even on his Twitter. He behaves on Twitter like anyone who's just posting through it, only he has other companies that he can just blast. So whenever the news cycle kind of doesn't go in a way that he wants it to go, he will suddenly be like, "See my rockets? Look at
yeah.
this launch." And you'll see his like feed go from being overwhelmingly whatever he was obsessively focused on to suddenly like, check out the new Tesla and see my rocket ships, and then
Mhm.
and try and kind of move away from whatever, that
So
I was saying.
I believe it was Batya from Newsweek, Batya Ungar was basically saying it seems fairly transparent that Elon's resurgent interest in the UK and freedom of speech and in grooming gangs and the Pakistani male communities and sexual assault is fairly transparently an attempt to move on from the H1B scandal, right? Is that in that he annoyed a load of the American right and then he was like, quick switch to a different country. Um,
Y
Whereas obviously,
yeah.
ironically, criticizing Pakistanis is one of the most Indian things that he could do. So it's really consistent with the H1B scandal.
The Indians are also like, "We've got your back."
Mm.
He that scandal, the debate was really interesting to me. I was like, "You losers are all fighting on Christmas and Christmas Day," which
Yeah,
was which was very weird because it is strange from the
you're meant to
people
be
who are
fighting your
like,
family in person. Yeah,
yeah, but your fan I was again saying this on Dumpster Fire this week, and I never know what makes it into the final edit, but it's like, w your families hate you. If you're spending all day on Christmas and Christmas Eve fighting on Twitter, your families are like, "Y What are you doing? They don't like you." And it is weird coming from, like, the pro-natalist crowd, like, "We need to have more babies and spend more time with our family," and, like, you guys are on a social media app on the holidays arguing literally all day long, but I will say the debate I think was quite interesting for many reasons. And one of the reasons is just that it's a fascinating discussion when people were actually getting into the nitty-gritty of it. I think there's reason I can see both sides of this debate, and that was refreshing to see, something that was like a healthy argument when you got
Yeah,
outside of, the racism. And some of it is interesting because I remember when I interviewed Glenn Beck in, like, 2018, and he talked about how humbling 2016 was for him because he thought he could influence the conservative base,
and he was in
and
for Ted Cruz, right?
yes, and he
Yeah,
was kind of a never Trumper, and he underestimated the base in general and MAGA and how they turned on him, and it cost him dearly and a lot of money. And he said it was a really humbling lesson because he had lost touch with his audience completely. And this is where I think because Elon has so many loyalists, of his own and like
it's
just
it's a stan culture. It's like being a Taylor Swift
yeah.
fan, right, or like a Charlie XCX or whatever. Like,
But I don't know that he actually understands the conservative base. Like they're happy to have him as someone who's allowing them to speak and on their side, but they we you saw this over the holidays, like,
yeah,
they turned on him pretty quickly because they
yeah,
were like, "Oh, you come with us, not the other way
yeah.
around."
Yeah, they're like, "You've been a Republican for less than a year," ultimately. I think
Yeah, and now
the
you're
thing is as
trying
well
to
for Elon and for Vivek and, the tech right, many of whom are fairly new to the Trump movement and to the MAGA world, particularly for the two people who are supposedly heading this Department of Government Efficiency, there was to me, a much easier way through that issue rather than doubling down and picking a side and being like, "Oh no, we need all these H-1B workers because they're our coders," right? You could have said, the US immigration system, the legal one, is also fairly outdated and broken. A lot of the visa categories that we're talking about haven't been updated in policy since like the late 1990s. Our job is to make the government more efficient. They could have been like, this is one of the things that our department will look into and see that we can get a system that helps get America the best people that it wants, and then fewer of those that it doesn't. That would be the obvious and easy way to solve that question. But instead, I think they kind of just walked face first into a thresher, right? And were
yeah.
like, well, no, and tried to stop it with their hands. So, like,
I don't know, it felt revealing to me though too, of just that the lack of I don't understanding of what the base actually wants, and that will be interesting to see a lot of the people who jumped on the Trump bandwagon, how they handle the deportations and stuff like that,
yeah.
when those
Well,
things
I
start.
think the interesting person to watch with it is JD Vance, right? Ultimately, who's the vice president elect, because he both comes from the world, like the Rust Belt world of Appalachia, of the people who were angry enough to vote for Trump the first time round because they felt forgotten and left behind and abandoned by unions or whatever. But then also his background, he has the Peter Thiel ties and knows Silicon Valley fairly well. So really, he should be the person to marry those two worlds and keep that coalition united and help the Trump administration to find an answer for that problem, which satisfies more people than it pisses off. But I don't think that he was checking his phone on Christmas Day because he was probably cooking, right? Like, I
Right.
mean,
And with his family. Yeah,
yeah, like,
but I think that the administration was pretty quiet on it because I believe I read somewhere that the chief of staff put out like in a memo telling everybody not to tweet
yeah. So
anything.
Susie Wiles is the Trump chief of staff, who basically was saying if you're a nominee like a week before the hearing starts, it's probably a good idea to post less, for example, or tweet less. And I'm fairly sure that Elon and Vivek's government department doesn't exist yet, so I don't know if I believe that their positions wouldn't require confirmation. So presumably they can saw themselves as exempt from that. But it's, I think, interesting that it came in the light of that. I think a lot of people, when it comes to this second Trump administration, have got a significant amount of faith in Susie Wiles because of her ability to kind of order chaos, right?
Mhm.
And with this administration, the coalition, the victory that Trump won was so overwhelming, and the coalition that was built was so broad that you do have like the Elon people coming in who will come into criticism with people who are more aligned with Steve Bannon and the first administration, who will in turn, potentially come into conflict with all of the voters who Robert F. Kennedy Jr. brought in, who are kind of your,
Totally.
make America healthy again types, crunchy suburban health mums who don't like seed oils. Like that is going to run into headfirst with the capitalist interests in the pharmaceutical and agricultural industry, who also probably ultimately wanted the Republicans to win, but then weren't expecting there to be an RFK factor. So you've got basically the winning the election was almost the easy part, and satisfying these coalitions so that you don't ostracize one so much that they turn against you in a way that's going to be fatal in the midterms is really the challenge, I think, of the first 2 years of the second administration.
Mm. Yeah, and then you have all the kind of just like FU disaffected liberals who voted and I don't think have any idea what the base
Such
wants,
as
and
such as who? Such as who? Are we talking about
I
that?
but see, I feel like because I've been in the culture wars for, now way too long, longer than I can even believe.
Yeah,
I at least knew that if I voted for Trump, there might be deportations that would not be comfortable to watch when they're put on television. I don't know how any of that's going to play out. I'm aware enough of what the base wants, pushes for, and is looking for to have the awareness that that's something that I was pulling a lever for as well, or that would be like, I'd have to own that.
yeah.
Um, I don't know that a lot of people who voted for Trump because they were like,
Is
"Fuck
that called
you."
is that called pre-gret? Is that the term?
What does that
It's like
mean?
it's like knowing that there's a distinct possibility that you regret something, but like factoring that into your decision when you make it.
I don't know that I'll regret it. Um, no. I mean, I don't
Like
know how you do like, are you saying I'm
like
gonna
obviously,
regret the deportations?
yeah, like,
Um
or you'll be like, well, if I'd known that was happening, I probably wouldn't have voted for it. You're like, I'm factoring that in, that might happen. I don't think it worked, and that's part of my
It's
calculus.
baked into the this is what they were this is why I was when I was watching this debate, it was interesting because these guys are like, "This was we've been pushing for this, you thought this was just about the illegal immigrants, but this is we're also talking about the visas where people come in through student visas and all kinds of other places." So
Yeah,
I think I had enough awareness that this would I'm not sure how it will play out because Trump
yeah,
seems to be very in alignment with Elon, and they're like the buddy comedy of the century now,
yeah.
but I I don't know if it's like pre-grad or just an awareness of, um, when people were like, "You're gonna have all this, like, blood on your hands." It's like, "Well, I've got blood on my hands for every president that I voted for no matter what. I'm an
Mhm,
American." So
mhm,
so I don't know that that's the thing that, is,
yeah.
I think it's just
So
more
one of the
I just
examples that people cited this week on that, right? You saw that on the left, a lot of people were pointing out, Joe Biden gives the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Jose Andres after the same week that Joe Biden gives like I think what another $8 billion in defense money to Israel, and obviously there were these Jose Andres workers, World Central Kitchen workers killed in a is airstrike, which America may have helped to fund, right? So
Yeah, it's my favorite meme. My favorite
mm,
meme is, like we talk about this all the time on Dumpster Fire, where it's, like, my tax dollars and then, like, somehow also my tax
yeah.
dollars. We're just, like,
Mm,
spending money fighting ourselves because it makes all these
yeah.
companies money, I guess.
It's catch
Yeah.
20. It's catch 22 where where Milo Minderbinder bombs his own runway. They're
Mm.
like the syndicate has calculated that this is the most effective use of.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's a maybe pre-grad or maybe just my point is that I'm not sure a lot of the people who were just reactionary fuck you to the left voters know the base quite they I don't know that they know that, and they might be like horrified in, a couple months.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, it's the 7th of January today that we're taping, and like not to spoil whenever this goes out, but the
It's going
inauguration
up
is
next
in.
week.
Okay, well, the inauguration, as we speak, is in 13 days' time, and ultimately, I think the biggest fear that people have about the Trump administration is that like it's a crapshoot. No one really knows what's going to happen. There are indications, there are social media posts, there are truths, and there are X's. But until they get in, anything could kind of happen. I think that obviously there's a lot of different variables in play. I think some people in Europe, where I am currently, people are most apprehensive about Trump because they know the most about him. I think that there's a lot of people in America and even in the MAGA movement now who are most apprehensive about Elon Musk. And then there are people who are
Mm.
apprehensive about RFK. And some of these people may have their fears realized, but also some of them, some of the people who are expecting their chosen guy, who's the reason they voted for Trump, to effect the change, some of those people will end up being disappointed, I think. Definitionally. Like it can't all come true, can
I don't know. It's
it?
been pretty weird. We've been covering some weird times. Um, yeah. It's gonna be we'll have to touch base again and see how it all plays out
Yeah.
because, they've been pretty quiet and
Which one of
everyone's
us will
like,
be in which one of us will be in jail?
everyone's like, when I don't know, they've been pretty quiet, and everyone's like, "Where's JD Vance been?" I'm like, "Reading, probably reading all the stuff
Mhm.
that they get, like, actually doing the thing you should be doing, which is, preparing yourself for whatever is coming." But it also does feel unusually quiet, like, it wouldn't surprise me if they've in the first 90 to 100 days, they're like, knocking on doors and stuff.
Well, who knows? Again, that's the other thing I would say is for a lot of the people who have, they believed that Trump was running on the Project 2025 agenda. Ultimately, those people should be more scared of JD Vance than Trump, possibly, right? Because
Mhm.
his social beliefs are more consistent with what's in that book than Trump's are, and Trump is kind of more broad coalition and more malleable. Um, in some respects, you could almost argue that Vance's vice presidency makes Trump safer, right? If he is seen as more of a kind of social threat, then maybe that lessens. I mean, I think that there should probably be fewer assassination attempts this year than there were last year, but maybe that could be maybe that ends up being a factor that dragged it down a bit.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. What's your biggest defective character?
My biggest defective character.
Yes.
Um, I work too hard. I don't know. I think that yeah, ability to switch off is a big one for me, and I kind of feel the sense of urgency to respond to work stuff because I think that it's one because I think that a lot of the work that I do is important, but also two because I think a lot of the success in my job comes from the relationships that I build with contributors or sources or people, and therefore like a quick response is a symbol that I'm being kind of respectful and obviously enshrining that persona in like the online world can sometimes maybe make me come across ruder in the offline world. I have learned
Mm.
over the Christmas period. So yeah, maybe that's one of the big ones. Um, and then I mean just other typical male stuff, right? Repression of emotion, your standard fare stuff like that, probably.
What's your biggest asset?
um, Apparently my accent. I gather when I go anywhere that's not DC or New York, then I obviously the Colin from Love Actually scene just plays out every single time. So
Okay, we can accept that because you're a Brit and you can't compliment yourself.
British and Irish. So need
Yeah,
two cultures that can't compliment themselves.
I know it well. I know. Well, where can we find you?
You can find me on Elon Musk's X at on Elon Musk's X at Matt's JPF McDonald. You can find me at thespectator.com, which is the US edition of the Spectator, for which I work and which Bridget writes.
You're the only
Um,
reason I'm still there, by the way.
well, that's very kind of you to
I
say.
realized that. I was thinking about that when I was doing my, like, assessment of my time and everything and having to really be like, "Why am I doing this, and why am I doing that?" And I was like, "Oh, I would have left a long time ago."
We hope to give you more reasons in 2025 that are beyond just me. for
Project
doing that, and
2025.
that aren't the threat of deportation, right? I mean, you're right there in Texas. They can just flick you across the border, like.
They can. I joke about that on stage, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't, about how when I came here from California, there was so much hostility, and I was, like, half expecting Abbott to put me on a bus to New York.
Mhm. That's a question I had for you actually, which is of the kind of comedy scene in Austin, which you're so plugged into, like the Joe Rogan and Kill Tony sphere at the mothership. How many of those people of the acts do you think ended up voting for Trump, and how many would admit it?
In that world, I don't know, but I think a lot of comedians were talking about how they were gonna vote for Trump because he's funny.
Hmm.
So, but I don't know, actually. You know what? I was kind of, like, taking the temperature of that place in of Mothership, and was talking to a lot of the workers, and they were saying it's probably like 50-50 split.
Hmm.
So, it was leading into the election, it was like, it seemed like a big family that, like, any family where there's, like, political differences, but it does seem, even amongst the staff, to be, um, very representative of America.
Interesting.
Yeah. I was actually, I don't know why eh, because I also do shows for, like, very liberal audiences, and, um, yeah, it's weird. It's like the audiences are quite different, I would say, but, it's good. I think it's good because you get kind of all of it. You get the, like, very liberals, you get kind of MAGA, it's weird. Like, the thing I noticed about Joe's Club, or Mothership,
Hmm.
whenever anyone, like a headliner, mentions RFK, it always gets the biggest applause. So it
Hmm.
seems like the audience is more of like an RFK Jr. kind of audience.
That was, I mean, I think that was Nikki Glazer's best received line in her Golden Globes monologue as well. Was the joke about the bear? You know, these are some of the things that in RFK's wardrobe or whatever, right?
Oh, right, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's pretty popular. More popular than I think I realize. So,
Also,
yeah.
Mike, I mean, you've had Dredo Mateo on and various other kind of guests in your world who I think come from that kind of space,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well,
And I
that's
think
that
I
was
think
like the
that was
funny.
the biggest democratic underestimation, I think, in terms of their calculus was not realizing how many of those people there were.
Yeah, and it's funny. I had my old yoga instructor on years ago. He started this podcast, Conspirituality, where and I'm glad he started it, because during COVID, our yoga feeds became like MAGA kind of overnight. They've transformed from crunchy, yogi, kind of normal West Side Los Angeles anti-vax, like, we had outbreaks of measles long ago,
Yeah,
folks, and into it was wild to watch. It was like he kind of talks about it as the paranoid conspiracy side of the right wing merged with the, like, magical thinking, hippie side of the, like, spirituality, Burning Man side of the left wing, and became this, like,
yeah.
crazy, and RFK really represents that, I think, more than anyone.
Was a broad, you had the yoga people, the porn people, the UFC people, the like health and wellness, fitness people, the Andrew Tate people, all
The
parts of America's rich,
influencers all
the
peddling
influencers,
their
yeah, the podcasters, the Gen Z TikTok bros, all part of America's rich cultural tapestry. But no,
I
RFK
love it.
RFK was a huge part of that for sure. Like,
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yep, they did need him. They did. Because even if they didn't vote, he pulled a lot of votes away from Kamala. For
mhm.
sure. Even just in talking to liberals who were gonna vote for him, even if they couldn't pull the lever for Trump, they definitely didn't vote for her.
There's that, and it's the fact that I believe there was the stat about one of the. I think it might have been the CNN exit poll or it was Gallup on the election night. The stat about I voted in this election because I thought that that democracy was on the ballot, right? And there were people who were registered Democrats who voted for Trump on that basis. And they think a lot of that reason would be because the Democrats didn't bother to have a proper primary or have an open primary or an open convention when Biden wasn't the nominee. But then also a lot of those people potentially RFK types who therefore were brought into the Trump coalition by him. So
got it. All right. Well, thank you. I adore you.
I adore you too, and I hope to see you next time. Let's do it in Austin because I would like to come and see
Yes,
you at the
come
mothership.
visit.
That would be great.
And then you can see the mothership.
Wonderful. Of course.
What
Thank you,
weird
Bridget.
times we live in. Thank you.
The check-in with Bridget and Cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.